Welcome to this very special In Conversations with Marion Scrymgour. Thank you, Marion, for so generously sharing your time and expertise with us. I would first like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I honour and acknowledge the strength and resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women with whom I stand in solidarity, and I acknowledge that sovereignty of this land was never ceded. You are welcome to tell us in the chat what traditional land you are zooming in from. I am personally thrilled to be conversing with Marion today, who is the Labor member for the Federal Electorate of Lingiari. With cultural links to the Tiwi Islands and Central Australia, Marion was raised in Darwin with her 11 siblings and extended family. Marion was a member of the Northern Territory Legislative Assembly from 2001 to 2012, representing the electorate of Arafura. Most notably, she was the first Indigenous woman to be elected to the Northern Territory Parliament. As a Deputy Chief Minister of the Northern Territory from 2007 until 2009, she was the highest ranked Indigenous woman in government in Australia's history and still is to this day. For much of her life, Marion has worked to improve the health and economic opportunities of Territorians. In recognition of her tireless economic work, she was awarded an honorary doctorate in health sciences from the University of Sydney in 2013. Like her own parents, Marion has been a community champion for education. She's committed to developing local economies so that children who invest time in their education no longer have to leave their community or town for work. If any of you have any questions as the conversation progresses, please put them in the chat and I will do my best to leave time at the end of the session to ask Marion. I just want to quickly note for our attendees that this will be finishing at 1:50 as Marion has to run off to the house. So welcome again, Marion. And my first question to you is, I want to talk about, before we talk about your experience as a current MP in Lingiari, I want to talk about what the lead up to you getting elected in the Northern Territory Legislative Assembly in the seat of Arafura. Would you say you were always interested in politics? Were you approached to run? Did you put your hand up? What was it that made you want to get involved?
Yeah, look, thank you. And I want to acknowledge, Carly, that I'm coming from the lands of the Ngunnawal Ngambri people in very cold Canberra. I think it was -3. It was such a shock to my system this morning. Look, you know, I think my progression into politics was born out of complete frustration, I think, in the community services sector that I'd worked for in a long time. I'd worked with land councils, I'd worked with within the local government sector, and I then worked in the Aboriginal health sector for a long time. And I could see that, you know, politics and policy should make a difference to people's lives. And I think that got me interested in putting my hand up. At that time, no Aboriginal woman had ever been elected into any Australian Parliament. And at the time, I was putting my hand up to stand for the Labor Party in the Northern Territory for the seat of Arafura. Carol Martin, who was another Aboriginal woman in Western Australia, was standing at the same time. The Western Australia election happened 2 weeks before the Northern Territory election, so she picked me at the post, and she was the first Aboriginal woman, very proudly, to be elected into any Australian Parliament in the 200 years of our federation, and that was a cause for real celebration. So she trailed the blood, you know, she created that pathway for me. Then it was my election. And I think it was during that political race, when I approached the Labor Party to stand in the seat that I did. The Labor Party at that time, well, all of the political parties only saw men as the ones who could win, particularly remote community seats, and no one had sort of thought, or even looked, had considered whether women should be part of this political system. So that was part of why I really pushed forward to not accept, no, you couldn't do it, but yes, I could do it, and then that could provide a pathway for other young women to consider this a worthy career, or to stand at the highest level and represent our people.
That is such a wonderful answer. There are so many takeaways from that for me. When we run our equipped courses, there were two things that you pointed out, which we discuss over and over again. And one of those is we must have more lived experience in our parliaments to shape policy so that the policy better reflects the needs of Australian people. So having an Aboriginal woman like yourself in our parliaments is necessary in order for your community to be properly represented. The other thing you spoke about was the bias around pre-selection and around women getting access to seats that are winnable, and the fact that there was always this idea that it was a man, particularly a white man, who was going to be able to win that seat, not a woman, let alone a woman of colour. So it's really fabulous to hear you say and stand up to those barriers that we can see can be broken down.
Yeah, and should.
And should, exactly. I want to take you back a bit to your time up in Darwin. You grew up in Darwin. You're the daughter of a Tiwi Islander mother, Claire, and your father, Jack, was forcibly removed as a child from his home in Central Australia. So how does your background influence and shape your political life?
Yeah, look, I think it shaped it in a social justice manner. So whilst my mother was, and knew her where she came from in terms of the Tiwi Islands, she was strong in culture, she was strong in language. She was also removed. Her father, my mother was one of the young women who was given to Bishop Zell at that time on the Tiwi Islands, so that a lot of the fathers wanted their daughters to avoid the promised marriage system, and they wanted a better life for their daughters. So part of that wanting a better life, their fathers offered them up to Bishop Zell, who was on the island at that time. He was a Catholic priest, and said, we want you to take these, I'm giving you my daughter and I want you to raise her and not have her in her community life. Well, my grandmother and other members of the family had they wanted to make sure that whilst she was in that mission, she maintained her language and her culture and her connection to her people very strongly. My father, on the other hand, had his life was in stark contrast to my mother's, where she always maintained and stayed on the Tiwi Islands. My father was removed at 18 months old from his mother, and he was put into an institution called the Bungalow in Central Australia. He was taken to a facility just outside of Alice Springs called Jay Creek, and if you look at when we got the information from the archives in terms of what a lot of those young kids, the torture and the trauma and the abuse that happened to them while they were in that home, was horrific. And it created a real sadness because, but it for us, it just, it made clear in our minds the anger and my father was a chronic alcoholic. He worked really hard every day. He was very focused on us having an education. And it wasn't until after he died that all this information had emerged for us as to his treatment when he was a young boy at 6, 7 years old. And, the abuse that he suffered at the hands of the people who was supposed to have been his protectors and looking after him. He was then transferred from that institution to Croker Island. And I think on Croker at nearly 8 years old, and he stayed on Croker Island in the top end from the time he was 8 years old up until he was 16 years of age, and he was then kicked off the island and told he had to go to work. But I think in that short space of time, I think 8 years that he was there, he had a real bond with, like all the kids that were placed in that home, with Margaret Somerville, who was the young woman who was put into she had all these kids in her care, and she treated all of those kids as her own. And I think for my father in that 8 years, it gave him the love that he didn't have for the first 8 years of his life. So, it was a stark contrast of where he was in Alice Spring to, when he got sent to Croker. I think for, just looking at both his life, my mother's life, and the differences between both, but the sufferings are still the same, but on different levels, had, I think, there was a fire lit in me a long time ago. My father used to always say that I was a little bit mad, but why would you want to, go into politics? But I went into purely to make sure that, governments don't create policies that are going to have the impact that it had on the lives of my parents.
Yeah, I just want to know for everyone that the forcible removal of children from their families amounts to genocide, because it amounts to the extinguishment of culture and language. And that's what really forms the basis of Aboriginal songs and attachment to land, etc. So, and storytelling. I have an 18-month-old, and I just can't imagine someone ripping her out of my arms. So I'm very sorry that your family went through this. And I'm, the other side of the coin is I'm extremely grateful that this propelled you into service and into representing your community. And it's really important that we have more women like you stand up, more Indigenous women stand up and represent their communities and enable better laws and legislation and behaviour towards our Indigenous peoples. Do you think that also affected or influenced your decision to stand down from the Labor Party, and then relation to the MacArthur River Mine?
Yeah, like there was MacArthur River Mine, there was also the outstations policy. There was a number of policies that I'd disagreed with the government on. One of the things that I've been very strong about, I represent the Australian Labor Party. I it's always been my party of choice. But if I think that we're putting in and I think it's bad policy, and I think it's policy that we haven't had discussions with our mob about, and it's going to have a profound impact, then and that's what happened when I was in the Northern Territory Parliament, despite a number of conversations with the Chief Minister, with the Minister who had carriage, with our caucus. I couldn't see, the government was going to still proceed with that policy. And I just felt that the policy, which had been completely rejected across the Northern Territory, was going to have a huge impact on people. I had no hesitation in saying, look, if we're not going to change this, then I can't stay in a party or a government who refuses to look at, because the policy that we were taking at that time in the Northern Territory was coming on the end of the Northern Territory intervention, which I had made a strong stance about, and I just thought was the wrong thing for the Commonwealth government to do, and that was to intervene in the lives of Aboriginal people under the guise of that there had been rampant child sex abuse, and there wasn't.
Yeah. So going back to the Northern Territory, what was it like being the first Indigenous woman to be elected? How were you received and how were you treated?
Yeah, look, it was daunting at that time. I think the expectations of many women, but also communities, having to weigh up and to learn, I think for the first time in a long time, the compromises that often get put on you as a member of parliament, the discrimination that I would go to, some functions or to meetings, and I would have, if there was a non-Aboriginal advisor with me, people automatically gravitated to that person thinking they were the elected member. And, people with me would say, look, no, we're not the member, she is. And then you'd see the look on people's face. And I've become so, you get it all the time, even in the position I am at the moment in federal parliament. You still get those same looks. And I think we've just got to, look, I often, in my mind, I just think, well, it says more about you than it does about me. So, I'm not going to allow that to affect the way I see, because I meet more good people than I meet people that are, and that's what is one of the joys of this job, is that you meet so many good people doing so many good things, and that makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah. It's very interesting you talk about being relegated as the staffer. So Bella Asberg, who led the feminist revolution of in the United States under Gloria Steinem, she was the first actually Jewish woman to enter Congress on a feminist platform. And she used to wear a hat so that she was recognizable, because otherwise every time she walked into an important meeting, she was asked to get coffee for everyone.
Hey.
So it's something that is definitely symbolic and experienced by all women from all different backgrounds all around the world to this day. And that's why we need more women in parliament.
Oh, absolutely. and look, having more women in parliament shapes the discussion and the outcome in a very different way. And I think you only have to look in our federal parliament at the moment, and I'm including on the other side of, the coalition, but the Teal independents, they're fantastic women. They're it's great to have conversations with them. And then there's our side, there's nearly 50% of our side, or 40, I think it's about 47% on our side of politics is women. And, the Prime Minister has more female ministers on his front bench, which is great to see. And I think more women is always a good thing.
We at Women for Election, we totally agree. So as a Deputy Chief Minister of the Northern Territory from 2007 to 2009, you were the highest ranked Indigenous woman in government in Australia's history. So what more needs to be done to ensure that you are not an anomaly and that more Indigenous women are given positions of leadership in all our legislative chambers?
Yeah, and look, it's I'm in federal parliament with two women I've had great admiration with, in terms of Linda Burney, who's the Minister for for Indigenous Australians, and also my good friend that was in the Northern Territory Parliament with me, Assistant Minister Senator McCarthy. We do need, and particularly in the Northern Territory, like we've got Minister Selina Yubo, we do need to get more women in that leadership role. The thing that we've got to do, though, is we've got to stop. There tends to be this view that women, and I see Natasha Files as the Chief Minister in the Northern Territory at the moment. Crime, like everywhere around Australia, is rampant, and it's rampant in the Northern Territory, and a lot of the comments that I see, whether it's, from other women or from men saying, women just can't run the show, maybe it needs a man to be there and to be tough. But it's tough, and we need to, parties have got to stop thinking that it will in any way take, both the government or the party backwards by having women in there. And I think for the Australian Labor Party, having, our affirmative action and our we have the quotas in terms of women. And I know that the Liberal Party says that they don't want quotas, but I think that there's a shift in their narrative, and I actually think that that's a good thing, because having women from a diverse range of backgrounds and in Parliament is a good thing, and we've got to have more of a conversation about just getting women and getting women elected, and what does that mean, and we shouldn't have to, it shouldn't be along party lines, or it should just be about what do we need to put in place to make sure we can show young women that it's a honourable profession. It's an important profession, because if we don't get like-minded people, we don't get people who to come in with that skill and that expertise, then Australia will suffer, but so will the different states and territories if we just get people who are who see politics as a career, because it shouldn't be a career. It should be a lifetime commitment to want to make a difference for community.
I wholeheartedly agree and applaud that comment. I'd just like to note that Kat Henaway is on our call. She's from Politics in Colour, and we're working alongside Kat at the moment, trying to influence and get more Indigenous women to run, particularly young women, to try and fill this void and try and make sure that these women are representing their communities on a real lived experience basis, not in a way, to secure power or to secure a job. So I think that there are things going on around the outside, but more and more work needs to be done. And it's having women like you in Parliament, these incredibly positive leaders that can hopefully influence younger generations and other women, that, yes, they can actually put their hand up and step up and do it too. So I thank you very much for your service and for putting yourself out there.
Yeah, and I often say to a lot of young women who ask me about, and they haven't made a decision whether they want to be part of the Labor Party or whether, it's the Liberal Party or whether it's the Greens. And most young people often think about the Greens. But I say to a lot of young people, have a look at the policies of each of those parties. And if you think that those policies are going to fit the way in which you think about and what the impact of your life is going to be both now and into the future, then that's, that sort of helps make their mind up. And I think that's an important thing for young people to consider.
Exactly. It doesn't matter what party, an independent, a party, a micro party. We need more women. We need more diverse women. And we need diverse political views. Diversity of thought is what creates the best outcome. So I agree. I want to then, let's step into your role in the federal parliament as the MP of Lingiari. I want to know what doors have opened to you that you haven't expected, and how you've been able to make a positive contribution to your electorate.
Yeah, look, Lingiari was certainly it was interesting for the first time. I suppose when I was in Northern Territory Parliament and holding a seat like Arafura, that you didn't do any door knocking in Arafura. It was more going out to community, having community barbecues, but getting around those communities, sitting down with our mob, having those conversations. With Lingiari having electorate, community towns like Alice Springs, and having to door knock and to break down the barriers of Alice Springs, I was quite surprised at the level of I suppose, racism that was there, and that I think that took a lot of work to go through with people. I think for a long time, because my former colleague held this seat for nearly 35 years, so he was in there for a long time. But for a lot of those older folk in the electorate, suddenly they're no longer having to vote for the old non-Aboriginal man, the old white man, the man with the mow and the hat. Suddenly they had this Aboriginal woman, and I think for a lot of them, they were unsure of who I was and whether there was going to be some, it was high risk, and what do we need to do? So look, for a long time, I spent a lot of time in Alice Springs. I had a really good team. We were door knocking. We were out there every day, talking to people. Not everyone was happy, and that's fine. You've just got to stand up to some of those views. Some of the comments make made my toes curl, but you've just got to keep going, basically, because if the end goal is I need to get elected, those words and some of them hurtful, and you just got to work through that. Yeah.
How do you think, as a representative of a community, as a true representative of the community where you come from, how do you think you've been able to make a positive contribution to your electorate?
Yeah, look, I think Alice Springs has been quite fraught with a lot of crime and dysfunction, and I'd like to think that in the 12 months as their local member, I've managed to pull together for the first time in a long time, getting everyone to sit in the same room, and I'm talking about the Aboriginal leadership that was simply missing before we had the discussion about kids on the street and the levels of crime amongst our Aboriginal youth. We now have an Aboriginal leadership group. We have them sitting down and talking to the business community, with police. So we're getting these joined up services, which simply didn't happen 12 months ago. There's been a lot of funding and resources put in, because when the former government intervened in the Northern Territory, there was the removal of over nearly $560 million from Central Australia. I'm proud to say that we've now put that funding back on the table in Central Australia, back to getting services better resourced to be able to deal with some of the, the confronting issues some of the issues they're confronting at the moment. So, look, I think that there's been a huge difference in Alice Springs. Have we completely eliminated crime? No, we haven't. I don't think there's any community where you're going to 100% get rid of crime, but at least it's a lot better than what it was. And I'm doing that same work with Catherine. I'm about to go back up to the top end, because Lingiari is all of the Northern Territory except Darwin. So I spend a lot of time going between Central Australia and then the top end. But I also have Christmas and Cocos Island, which is in the middle of the Indian Ocean territories. And so there's a lot of travel involved in that. When I'm not in Canberra, I spend a lot of time out in the electorate. It's a beautiful electorate. I love getting out. That's part of what I enjoy about this job, is it's about the people and it's about the communities. And if I can be that conduit between communities and government, and to try and fix some of their issues, then I see that as an important part of my role.
I totally agree. And I think it's beautifully said, to be that conduit between the people and the government. And I think when you have a white man with a mow and a hat, as you said, I love the image of it, representing a community that he doesn't really come from or that he doesn't really understand, that's why there's no movement. And within 12 months, you've been able to get the Aboriginal leadership together to sit down and start to really deal on a practical level with the issues in your community. And I applaud you for that. And I think it just shows us, and particularly here at Women for Election, the work that we're doing is really, really vital, because we need to have more women who represent their communities in positions of power to make real sustainable change. So thank you. I'm now going to go to the audience because I'm mindful that you have to leave in a few minutes. Kyra, if you'd like to take yourself off mic, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, thank you. Firstly, Marion, thank you for your time. I'm coming from the Darwin land in Western Sydney. So my question is based around, I believe a key barrier for many young women in putting their hand up for office is the self-confidence, the lack of confidence of their abilities and their skills. So what advice do you have for young women to boost their confidence to put their hand up and participate?
Yeah, look, when you look at, some of the stuff, and we've just had the Kate Jenkins review, which was done in the previous parliament, and the stuff that happened, in the parliament before the election. And, last week in parliament, we saw some terrible, examples of what turns particularly young people off, and young women in particular with politics. And you sort of, I was sitting there and I remarked to one of my colleagues, with all the, the grubby questions and the politicking, everyone seems to forget that a young woman was sexually abused, or alleged to have been sexually abused. And we should never forget that we've got to make Parliament a better place, particularly for women, and building their confidence to be resilient, and because it is a tough game. And I often say that to a lot of young women, but don't be turned off by it, because our democracy depends on young women like yourself, if you're thinking about politics, to be part of, whether it's part of a political party, whether it's as an independent, whatever it is, whatever shape or form that takes. Our democracy needs young people with those skills, with those ideals and those aspirations, to never give up on our democracy, because if we do, then it becomes a sad indictment, like we see in some overseas countries.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, Marion. It's interesting, if you look at the statistics, the Australian Parliament is one of the oldest parliaments comparatively to the UK or the US. So, when we talk about diversity of women entering, we're not just talking about women of colour, women with disabilities, LGBTQ women. We're also talking about young women. And it's very important not to forget that. And I really appreciate the support that I know that you're giving to other women in the party. I have another question, because I just wanted to note, Julie, that your question is very similar, unless you wanted to ask something around that. Is Julie there?
No, it's fine. I think it stands as a comment maybe rather than a question.
Sure, no worries at all. So you spoke about the fact that you have experienced a lot of racism, particularly running federally. So we talk about, in your situation, you have faced intersectional discrimination, meaning both misogyny and racism. I wanted to know, what are some of your best comebacks or responses, and how do you deal with that in your dealings with the public, or with your parliamentarians and senators?
Yeah, look, I was born into so you mentioned earlier, I have 11 siblings. Out of that 11, I have 8 sisters. 8 sisters who have been, I think, for me, the greatest repository to be able to talk to women that I know, will not, and the comments that I make and how I'm feeling isn't going to be, end up on the front page of the newspaper. And I think for all of us as women, we need that sort of support behind us, because it can be a lonely place, and it can be, the journey gets all that much harder without that. And I think having my sisters, and having, Senator McCarthy and Linda, but, all of the women on our side that we can talk to. We've got a really fearless whip who's a woman in our party, and she's fantastic. Her door is always open, and it's great to go in there when you have those days, and I've had them where you get up one morning and just a screaming mess and you're just emotional, and you just need someone to whose shoulders to cry on, because it can be tough, but you've got to be, we all take the view that we're all human, we're all women, and I think when women support women, women win, and that's the motto of Emily's List, which is was started by another great woman in the Labor Party, Joan Kerner, and she was a great supporter of getting Aboriginal women into the Australian Labor Party and making sure that the Australian Labor Party pre-selected women, and particularly Aboriginal women, in safe seats. So that was important, but I think we've got to get the support structures. Your organisation plays an important role. We've got to keep having this conversation and getting more young women from all the diverse backgrounds, involved, because this place belongs to all of us, and it shouldn't be just, men have always been a big part of politics, but I think that women have started stamping their ground and saying, I often think about how Julia Gillard, who was our first female Prime Minister of this country, how she was treated, and it was appalling, the way in which she was treated, as our first female PM. And, when young women and even older women have a look at how she was treated, they sort of think, God, why would I want to do that? But we should never give up, because if we give up, then we give up on democracy, and we can't do that.
No, we can't. I agree. And I just thank you very much for your kind words of women election. It means a lot to us. We really have tried very hard the last few years, particularly Lucia and I, to try and equip and train and support women. One of the things we are very mindful of, which is what you pointed out, is how to support women once they're in Parliament. And that's why we have our Parliamentary Friendship Group. We've just had our launch last week, and we're hoping to to make it bigger and better, and to make it available for all women from all backgrounds, from all different parties, from all states, to come together as a safe space to support.
Yep.
So I hope to see you at our events, and we'll definitely include you. Do you have time for just one more question, or do you have to run? Kat, would you like to take yourself off mic and ask your question?
Thank you. Hi, Marion. Lovely to hear your story. It's Kat from Politics in Colour here. My question is, do you think Labor will pre-select an Aboriginal Prime Minister anytime soon? Maybe yourself.
Definitely not me, Kate, but that, sometime in the future. I often, sitting in this place, I often think back to, and I was over in the Senate, sometimes you go over there for punishment, because I just think the Senate's another ball game altogether. But I was listening to Pauline Hanson, and I remember Pauline Hanson, when she first came into this place, she said, what a scary thought. One day we're going to be ruled by a Prime Minister who could be black and who's Asian and, and a female. And I thought, bring it on, what... Yeah. We might see that. She's becoming really irrelevant, and I think some of the views, and it's a shame, because we don't need to have that sort of view around, because I think one day we may see an Aboriginal, and hopefully I get to see it in my lifetime. I think there are fantastic young, women out there, black women. We need to keep encouraging them. Kat, with your surname, Henaway, you're not related to Flo, are you?
Yeah, she's my cousin. She's up there in Darwin. Bless her.
Yeah, married to my nephew.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Small world, eh?
So it's a small world.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marion. I'm very, very mindful of the fact that you've got to run to the house. The bells are going to start ringing in a moment.
Yep.
We would really like to thank you for your support and your encouragement and your kind words. And please keep on fighting the good fight. You are representing your community and your people in such a profound way. And we are very, very grateful for your service. So thank you very much.
No, look, as I said, Carly, thank you very much for inviting me. I think anything I can do to, if you're ever in Parliament House or your group is in Parliament House, I'll certainly encourage women from our side of politics to be part of it, because we do need more women in Parliament, and we need more women to be putting their hands up for election. So anything that we can, in a non-partisan way, contribute, certainly, you know, be open to sort of to give any support or assistance.
Thank you so much. That is just wonderful. And we will be calling on you, Marion.